Barbara said.
Can't hear anything. I can leave and come back at 7, right?
Yeah, you can just
Yes.
leave it on, but just come back. Yeah.
You can turn your video. You can turn your video off. There you, yeah.
See you all in a few minutes.
In a few minutes, everyone. We can go in there. That's not for a minute.
Oh. Can you just open the doors so everybody knows here? He ran upstairs, but just keep the door open so he knows to go back there.
That's a preserve. Absolutely. No, I. We got. Perfect. This is mine. Then you're,
Major
there.
Hold you go. Hello.
Right there.
voices from the studio. Bad thing. Good.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, we're good. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our June 8th Portsmouth Town Council meeting. Before we get started, I just go over a couple of the rules. Those of you that are joining in on a phone, *6 will mute and unmute your phone when speaking. *9 will indicate that you have a question. Those of you that are on your web browser, you have the blue hand to raise your icon, raise your hand. Anyone that will be speaking tonight, please provide us your name and address for the clerk when you prior to speaking. Now, if we could get started with our pledge of allegiance and a moment of silence for our men and women serving in harm's way. To the flag, United
United
States,
States of America,
to the
the
republic,
republic for which it stands, nation
One nation,
under God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with liberty
with
and
liberty
justice
and
for all.
justice for all.
Oh. Okay, because we are streaming in, we'll start with our roll call.
Who's that?
Here.
Ms. Abbott?
Here.
Mr. Hamilton?
Here.
Hudson?
Here.
Kelly?
Here,
Dr. Ryan?
Here,
Mr. Aguirre?
Here. Thank you. We'll get started with our president's executive session. Executive summary. Prior to tonight's meeting, we have an executive session pertaining to collective bargaining, litigation, sessions pertaining to collective bargaining, litigation. One vote was taken during our executive session. I'd also, before we start, I'd also like to congratulate our Portsmouth High School graduating class of 2020. Friday night graduation, and by all accounts, I've heard a lot of positive feedback. It was probably not what anyone had expected when the year began, but through it all, I think that students had a very, very enjoyable graduation, and I do like to thank all those that were involved in helping put that together on Friday night. So thank you all, and on behalf of the council, we wish all the graduates the best of luck. Thank you.
I think the gong should become a permanent addition to the ceremony.
Okay, we'll get moving here. First item is our consent agenda.
Keith Hamilton, move to approve as presented.
Mark
Glenn
Ryan,
Capps,
seconded.
All those in favor?
Mrs. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Capson?
Aye.
Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Aguirre?
Aye. Passes 7-0. Now we will be sitting as the Board of License Commissioners. First item is a request from Island Park Preservation Society, 21 Beach Street, to reschedule the date of the Class 1 daily liquor license for Easter brunch April 12th, canceled due to COVID-19 to June 21st, 2020 for Father's Day event at Thriving Tree Coffee House.
Linda Ujifusa, I move that the request be granted.
Andrew Kelly, second.
Thank you all. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Capson?
Aye.
Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. Next, we have a peddler's license. It's a mobile food establishment. New license for Derek Ardito, doing business as Mooseman's Kettle Corn, 87 Manhattan Avenue, one vehicle.
Mark Ryan, move to approve.
Keith Hamilton, second, and request samples.
We have a hand up in the audience as well.
Oh, okay. Let's see, hold on here. It's Mr. Fitzmaurice. Fitzmaurice, you're
Thank you,
muted.
Mr. Aguirre. My question goes back to a report that you made regarding the executive session. I'd like to know what the motion was and who voted which way.
That's not.
Yeah, no, I don't believe we're required, I believe we're just required to, indicate that, a vote was taken. I think that's all we're obligated to do, under our,
You can say what the outcome of the vote was. You can say it was 7-0. Or 6-1 or 5-4. You don't have to, I guess it could be 5-4, but.
okay. One vote was taken, and it was 7-0. So that's what I can explain to you this morning. And we have another,
Thank you.
okay, no problem. Okay, so that, the one. Okay. All right,
You can vote.
we get through we're voting on, all
We're voting.
right, so
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Capson?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Aguirre?
aye. Motion passes 7-0.
Mr. President, I may have missed this, but I also saw that there was an application for a peddler's license under the consent agenda for Dell's Lemonade. Do we need to vote on that?
We did.
On the whole consent agenda.
Okay, all right, even though, okay, they were sort of in different places. All right, great, thanks.
Motion to adjourn as the Board of License Commissioners.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Hamilton?
Aye.
Capson?
Aye.
Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. The motion passes 7-0. Next, we have our meeting minutes from our town council meeting on May 20th. And
Motion to receive is presented.
Or approve as presented.
Approve is presented.
Yes. Second.
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Abbott?
Aye.
Dickinson?
Aye.
Mr. Capson?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes. On to our town administrators report. Mr. Rayner.
Mr. President, Town Council, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to announce that the Police Department has been approved to receive a grant from the Christopher and Dana Reed Foundation. The grant award is in the amount of $5,530 and will fund the installation of handicap accessible hardware for the front doors of the police station. There are no matching funds required. With respect to update regarding COVID-19. I'm sure everybody is aware that phase 2 of reopening Rhode Island has started. Just as a refresher, during this phase, social gatherings are limited to 15 people. Domestic travel restrictions have been relaxed, however, 14-day self-quarantine remains for those returning to Rhode Island from an area that is still under stay-at-home restrictions, and those arriving from international destinations. Many businesses and venues have been allowed to reopen under restrictions. However, people who can work from home are still cautioned to continue working. Restaurants may begin indoor dining at up to 50% capacity, and again, under certain restrictions. Child care services have been allowed to resume, and summer camps can resume on June 29th, again, certain restrictions. I would ask that everybody please monitor the town website for more information. The Portsmouth Emergency Operations Center has transitioned from what we call a hot status to a warm status. In essence, staffing has been reduced. However, we are still monitoring and responding to the COVID email address and hotline. Additionally, we are still maintaining our wellness team, our food bank, our personal protective equipment team, our public information team, our business recovery team, our med squad planning team, our volunteer reception team, the enforcement of executive orders, and cost tracking. The town hall remains closed throughout phase 2, but we anticipate opening with restrictions for future guidance, which I anticipate will start in phase 3. I'd also like to echo what the President said regarding the Portsmouth High School graduation. I'd like to thank Mother Nature, Newport Polo, the police, fire, and public works departments for their support in assisting the school department provide an alternative style graduation ceremony for the graduating senior class. It was a pleasure to assist the school and the dedicated parents who all came together to create something special and unique for our graduates and make lemonade out of lemons. Well done to everybody. The Arbor Day Foundation has named again that Portsmouth be a 2019 Tree City USA. With Tree City USA recognition, Portsmouth has demonstrated a commitment to effective urban forest management and is doing its best in helping to preserve our important resources for residents now and in the future. I'd like to thank the members of our tree commission, John Fitzgerald, the tree warden, and Brian Woodhead, the Director of Public Works, for all they do for our community. Additionally, in the same vein, the Portsmouth Garden Club has completed their spring planting at Town Hall, Church Lane, and the library. They did a great job, and if you get a chance, please drive by and admire what they've done for our town. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Rayner. On to our presentations.
Mr. President, this is Linda Ujifusa. I just want to cut in here just for a second to once again thank the staff and all our Portsmouth volunteers for doing such an outstanding job handling this COVID-19 crisis. They made it look relatively easy, but I know that it was a ton of hard work. And so thank you to everyone. We're just really, really fortunate to live in a town with such great staff and volunteers. And so thank you again.
Thank you, Ms. Ujifusa. Okay. Questions? Okay. On to our resignations and appointments. We have an appointment for the Melville Park Committee.
Move to approve, Ms. Aga. Haga. I think it's Haga with the H being silent.
Ben Katzman, second.
Have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Capson?
Aye.
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. Okay, on to old business, discussion and action. It's, determine the operating and implementation guidelines for Sandy Point and Quarry Point beaches. Great.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've been asked to provide another report regarding the operations at Macquarie Sandy Point. Previously discussed measures to implement, measures that should be implemented at Sandy Point and Macquarie Point in response to COVID-related issues and guidance. Recap, we are at beach pass parking only. We have variable message boards stationed at the location of both those areas with resident-only messages flashing. We have installed social distance signage. We have established one-way entry and exit lanes. We've established a 100-person limit at Sandy Point. We've established resident-only parking on the closest side streets to both those areas. And we have tasked the police to increase patrols, enforce vehicular and pedestrian traffic and parking ban from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. And correction, it's at 10 a.m. and 5 a.m. between Memorial Day and Labor Day, and then during the following months, 9 p.m. and 6 p.m. Per Town Code Section 250-13 Bravo. We've asked them to monitor non-resident use of those areas and to maintain a police presence at Park Avenue in an effort to encourage compliance with current COVID guidance. With respect to Sandy Point, since our last report, we are seeing a large uptick in visitors during good weather. Those visitors tend to be college and high school young adults. Since we started this, we have issued 78 citations, most of which are parking citations. One citation was issued on Sigourney Avenue, and there was one citation for alcohol. We are noticing what we're calling drop-offs. We're seeing an uptick in the number of people who are being dropped off in Sigourney and then walking down. So either this is to avoid the resident only or to get more people in the car, we don't know. Attendants have been on duty during clement weather, and the recreation director and police chief are working together to enforce residents only and the beach limit. We've noticed no significant after hours issues at Sandy Point. Macquarie, we've also noticed an uptick in visitors, but not the same as at Sandy Point. We have fewer reports of people on the beach after hours, and since we started this, we have issued 24 citations, again, mostly parking. But 3 of those citations were for unpermitted fires, and 2 were for littering. The recreation department has posted an attendant during peak visiting times on the busiest days to reduce the need for police patrols in those areas so that those police can be go elsewhere. And we've seen a significant drop in the number of complaints for reduced or after hours activities in the quarry. With respect to our plan for moving forward and recommendations, we recommend keeping in place the current guidelines that were previously adopted. We're going to be placing attendants now that school is closing and kids are more part-time help is available. We will be placing attendants on duty from 10 to 4 during clement weather. Lifeguards will start this week, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and then we will shift to a Wednesday through Sunday schedule during good weather the following week. We will maintain an extra officer on duty as needed. In those times will be coordinated, they will be at random during peak times, particularly during the weekends, and those times will be coordinated between me and the police chief. We will keep in place the rules that we've enacted so far, and up until now, we've been placing a greater emphasis on Macquarie. We seem to taken care of that. We will still keep the press on Macquarie, but with respect to the number of people who have been using Sandy Point, we do feel that there's a need for greater emphasis on compliance at Sandy Point. Additionally, at the last meeting, there were 4 suggestions by a resident regarding Macquarie Point, which we have looked at. The first is sign consolidation. We agree. There are now too many signs at the entrance to Macquarie, and it has become confusing and unsightly. The Director of Public Works has developed a plan to consolidate all the current signage into one sign, which is patterned after the standard welcome to Portsmouth signs that one sees on the roadways when entering town. Second was to eliminate open fires. We agree in principle. Fires are generally not permitted on town property, and open fires can present significant risks to the safety of people and property. We recognize, however, that there is a very long-standing practice of allowing open fires in Macquarie Point. But we do believe that the safety concerns outride that, and that the council should eliminate open fires on all town property, including Macquarie Beach. There was a recommendation for the installation of a gate or a chain at the entrance to Macquarie. For those that are familiar with the area, the entrance road into Macquarie is fairly steep. And once you enter, once you're off the paved area, it's almost followed immediately by a nearly blind turn. We are concerned that a gate or a chain would be dangerous to unaware visitors. Additionally, we do not have the staff that can take on the responsibility of opening and closing the gate or chain twice a day, every day. However, the measures put in place last year and the measures that we've added this year are beginning to change the behavior of Macquarie. We recommend continuing these efforts and do not recommend the placement of a gate or chain at Macquarie. Last, there was a suggestion that we designate a separate fishing and swimming area. It's a little trickier. It sounds simple, but there's a lot of nuance if we were to do something like that. We understand the logic behind the recommendation. However, I want to make sure that the council is aware that Macquarie is not a designated beach. Procured by the town as open space. If we designate swimming areas at Macquarie, we will have to adhere to minimum standards for recreational beaches as set forth by Rhode Island General Law and Department of Health. This would require more analysis, and we do not want to set a process in motion that the town is not able or prepared to undertake at this time. We recommend holding off on this recommendation for now. And lastly, limiting town-owned resources to residents only has created an unintended consequence in other areas of town. We are particularly noticing an increase in the number of people congregating at CRMC right-of-ways, Teddy's Beach, Park Avenue, and underneath the Secana Bridge. Up to this point, we have concentrated on enforcing guidelines at Sandy Macquarie Point. As our part-time workforce becomes more available, we anticipate we will be able to target our police patrols more effectively at other areas in town. And at a future meeting, we will comment on our progress. President.
Thank you. Councilors?
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
Mr. Rayner, I got a couple complaints from people that tried to go to the beach like during the week and were turned around and were obviously upset. How many times have we reached like capacity and had to turn people away?
I'm not aware that that has happened. I mean, there's obviously some peak times, and that has happened. The overwhelming majority of people that are getting turned away, though, are people arriving who are not residents.
Yeah. Okay. As we proceed from phase 2 to phase 3, is there any merit to adjusting that limit, since we're going to be going into better and better weather? And the goal here is to make it safer for Portsmouth residents to go to the beach in some way, not necessarily to overly restrict people's access to the beach. I know it's a fine line, but I'm concerned that will happen more and more, and I don't think that's really our goal or intention here.
With respect to your first question, I'm getting a report from the rec director that we have turned people away for reaching capacity 3 times. With respect to phase 2 to phase 3, I don't know the answer to that. I do know, I mean, we're on conference calls twice a day, and obviously the governor speaks to us 3 times a week now. There is a feeling that phase 2 is going faster and better than anticipated. Originally, it was envisioned that phase 2 would last 3 to 4 weeks. So that would put us right at the end of June, right around 4th of July. So I'm anticipating that we would transition to phase 2 either 4th of July weekend or immediately thereafter. I don't know what the guidelines are going to be. What's driving the guideline right now with respect to the number of people is obviously the social distancing requirement. And I know it's confusing. DEM has put out a 60 square foot distancing, and we came up with, if everybody was standing straight at the beach, that would probably be okay, but that's not the way it works. And there's also CDC and state guidance that states that you should maintain 6 foot separation. Well, if I take the average height of an adult and do 6 feet all the way around, it's between 150 to 160 square feet that is required. So that's what's driving it right now. So if during phase 3, they reduce the social distancing requirement, then of course we can put more people on the beach. And I sent around to the council, you know, kind of the logic and the math behind what we used and did to arrive at that figure. We were obviously fairly conservative. So I think that if we see that things are going well down there, we could probably safely increase that number of people to about 150. So we would have no issue with that. When we originally did this math, we were only looking at the most popular portion of the beach, the sandy portion. There is a sandy slant rocky area till you get to Pure Rocks to the south of that area, which is about 163 feet long. So when you look at the average width, the average length of that area, you can fit about another 50 people using our social distance guidelines. So if we wanted to increase that to 150 people, that would be a good recommendation.
So just some other thoughts, because I think the Parks and Rec Committee and I also got some other complaints. You know, we're kind of trying to calculate numbers and square footage and this and that. I've been to Sandy Point a couple times now, and you're right, there's a lot of college kids and high school kids. I certainly want them to go and enjoy the beach. But they are congregating in groups of like 18, 25, 30 kids with very loud music. And then, you know, that's driving that 100-person capacity. And then families can't go with their kids. It seems like, to me at least, it seems like it'd be a much more straightforward to implement a parking restriction, and rather than trying to count the kids. And I don't know, does a 3-year-old toddler count the same as an 18-year-old college kid? I don't know, the 3-year-old's probably going to sit closer to his mom. I think to a certain extent we have to use a reasonable restriction on the capacity for the beach, which from what I gather is 130 cars. Maybe reduce that to half and say we'll only allow 65 cars to park in the lot. Once we get to the capacity, that's it. That way we're not like trying to count people. It might be a little bit easier to enforce. And then there's a little bit, you know, it's less subjective, I would say. And if you have 2 college kids, for example, they go together in a car and they sit in one place, and to a certain extent, we kind of have to let people implement their own social distancing to keep themselves safe. And a family, likewise, that goes to the beach, the 4 of them can sit all right next to each other, you know, 60 feet further down. So rather than implementing numbers, because people are walking in from Glen Park also, they're walking down from the neighborhood. It's very hard to keep track of the number of people that are actually there. And I believe Middletown's also implementing it. through a parking restriction. A lot of places are using parking restrictions to kind of just manage their numbers. So I would be much happier to see, you know, we can fit 130 cars. We're going to restrict it to 50% to kind of control the number of people that are on the beach. We're going to try to keep it a little bit safer for Portsmouth residents by making it resident only, but not over restrict or over analyze the problem. So that would be my preference.
In the capacity calculations that I forwarded to council, you know, obviously we went with number of people because we thought that would be easier. What we're seeing, as I alluded to earlier, we're seeing a lot more people dropping off at Sandy Point. At the bottom of those calculations, you can see that we also calculated cars, so you're not far off at all. At 100 people, the average number of cars is 46. At 144 people, the average number of cars is 71. But that's assuming that 90% of the people arrive by car. Middletown used 80% because more people bike in that area to get there. We can go either way. I don't have a dog in this fight. It's the more cars you drive away from the beach, the more people are going to park at Glen Manor House or elsewhere, or more drop-offs we're going to get, and we'll just have to. With respect to the argument about people are going to have to social distance, yeah, nobody here is naive. We know exactly what's going on. But unfortunately, I don't have the liberty to take that into my calculation. I have to adhere to the governor's executive orders and the state guidance. So unfortunately, that's what we have to do. So cars, people, it's you know, 6 1 half dozen the other. It would work, I think, either way.
Okay, well, based on your recommendation that we could probably increase to 150 people, and seeing as that the numbers are not that far off, I would make a motion that we increase the capacity to 50% of the cars that are allowed in that lot.
Keith Hamilton, second.
There you go.
We have a motion and a second, but we also have at least a comment. There's a hand up. So, Weston, you're muted at the moment. Good. Unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so, yeah, Wesley Eccles here, 4 Wampanoag Drive, Portsmouth, Rhode Island. First of all, thanks, Mr. Rayner and the council for all the attention that's been, that we've seen over the past couple of weeks regarding McCrory. So I've seen positive changes, more kids down there playing with their parents. So it has become more of a family-oriented beach, which is a good thing. So just 2 points, Mr. Rayner, on the fires. Did you say that the council was moving toward banning no fires whatsoever?
They've taken a vote on that. It's after studying the issue, it's the recommendation of the fire chief, the police chief, and myself, and the recreation director that we ban fires on McCrory just as we do on all other town property.
Okay, great. Well, certainly we totally agree with that, or I do, and my surrounding neighbors. So thank you very much for that. And secondly, Mr. Rayner, this is my last question. I just need some clarification around that Sandy Point is a quote designated beach, and McCrory is not. So therefore, there's different rules. Could you just give me a little more clarification on that, please?
Okay.
And this was in regards to the fishing and the swimming.
Right. So there's a number of general laws that apply. General Law 23, 1-5, 1-17, 21-1, 21-4, and then Rhode Island Department of Health Regulation, Titles 216, Chapter 50, under environmental health. And in there, they outline the standards and the guidelines that have to be used to meet minimum standards for recreational facilities consistent with statutory provisions. specifically for recreational facilities and beaches. So if the town were to designate McCory Point as a town beach, there are a number of things that we would have to provide. First off, it becomes subject to testing. There's licensing. There's conditions on animals and pets. I won't go through the entire thing, but the most difficult one to take care of right away would be the installation of toilets, lavatories, and showers. We don't have those facilities there. And right now, it would be very difficult to place them there because the town property doesn't meet the elevation that would be required to put them there. So there would be an extensive engineering study to have to do that. So I'm just cautioning the council that I didn't say no. The recommendation was not no. It's not up to me to say no. But I would hate for the town council to lock themselves into something that we're not prepared and we haven't adequately studied right now. That's where we're going with it.
So there's a big distinction between town designated beach like Sandy Point and McCory Point is not officially a designated town beach. It can be town owned, but not town designated beach. Have I got that right?
Correct. It's open space.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Rain. I really appreciate and the police department and everybody for the attention that they've given to McCory. So, so I've seen a big change so far. So thank you very much.
Mr. President,
Hamilton?
just one comment. Apparently, I've heard it from a couple of people. The parking along the streets are residents only, and that's residents of the town of Portsmouth, not just the neighborhoods to which the beaches abut. Correct?
That was residents. I'll let Brian Peters step in here, but as I understand it, the parking passes were issued to, there were 4 per unit address on Sigourney and then the 2 streets at McCory. It was for those residents only. So Chief Peters, can you step in?
Correct. So those parking passes were just issued to the residents who live on those streets. So each home or residence received 4 parking passes per residence on the street for themselves and their guests. So it was not for the entire town. It was just for the homeowners on those streets. And that was William, Annette, and
So if I were to drive down and park in front of a house at Sigourney, I would get a ticket on a Saturday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
you may, if you didn't have the parking pass. Obviously, if you're a Portsmouth resident, we would have to reassess that and address that. But by how the issue was presented and how we actually took the direction from the council, we just made those streets just to avoid parking down there who couldn't get in. Was because we limited it to 100 people at that location. It wouldn't matter if you were from another area of Portsmouth or a neighborhood in Portsmouth, that the cap was already reached and we didn't want people who couldn't get down to the parking area parking on the streets and then just walking down.
But if we've reached the cap and somebody walks down the hill, you could say we've reached the cap and turn them away.
Correct.
Unless they walk, if correct, if they're walking down there, reason why we're getting complaints actually from the residents on Sigourney, if we're referring to Sandy Point, they're actually going through neighborhoods and houses. There's some proper right of ways, people's property on Sigourney, and they'll actually just be dropped off at those locations and then walk down to the beach. In William Street, if you're referring to William Street, by McCory, that was the same way there, is if people couldn't park there, that wouldn't affect anything because Portsmouth residents can park there down at McCory.
Okay.
So,
I was under the thought process that we were allowing it for Portsmouth residents and not just street residents. Was my thought process during the original discussion. So I just don't want to see us ticketing Portsmouth residents for parking on
We have only
a
issued,
legal town street.
we've only issued one parking ticket that location. I don't know at this time who that was issued to, but I can look into that. And if it was a Portsmouth resident, we'll make sure we take care of that.
Thank you, Chief.
Mr. President, Linda Ujifusa, I have a question for Chief Peters. If the goal is to maintain proper social distancing on the beach, what is the easiest way to control that? Counting cars or counting the people on the beach?
If I could just step for a second, that's one of the things that we're hoping is going to help us. We've noticed that when there's an attendant down on the beach, it's a little easier to enforce the social distancing. So by putting the lifeguard back, there'll be 3 lifeguards on station. We're hoping that that helps, and that will help give us a leg up on enforcing the social distancing.
And
So,
we-
Keith, sorry, can I talk?
Yeah.
Keith, I understand your concerns about ticketing Portsmouth residents. I think it's just a whole array of unfortunate circumstances that we're operating under. I don't see, I mean, if we're going to let people park on the streets and walk down, then there's no point in having a limit at all. I think we need to, we should limit the parking on the beach, and that's that. And I don't know, if you really need to park in Sigourney, find somebody you know that lives on the street and ask if you can borrow their parking pass. But otherwise, we restrict it, make it Portsmouth residents only, and don't put any restriction. I think we kind of have to do both. It's a lot of unfortunate circumstances, but it's just going to be a rough summer, frankly.
It is, but listen, I could go down Sigourney, take a left on a Colonel Christopher Green, and I could be 15 feet away from Sigourney, and I'm not in a non-resident parking area. So
I know, but are we really
I
going
think
to try to?
no, I think our police force has enough common sense to figure it out. I'm hoping that the ticket that they gave was the Massachusetts plate. That's all. I think our police officers have enough common sense. But I just, there were, the reports that I got were not saying any point more towards Macquarie, where it was residents coming out saying, you can't park there because it's residents only. And it's Macquarie residents only, not just William Street residents. So I just don't want our residents getting into fight over parking spaces on a legal street.
Mr. President, could I ask Chief Peters' opinion then? As the person in charge of enforcing the laws, what would you prefer to see the requirement be? That we are limiting parking, and if so, to what? Or limiting numbers of people, and how do we do that best? Like, what is your recommendation for going forward?
I think at this point, while we're in phase 2, I think we have to still go by what the governor's orders are. And the issues that we're seeing is, I will tell you, we've been down there several times when the large gatherings of the high school students are there, as well as the college-age students. And it becomes difficult for the officers to enforce at those times because they do listen, and then when you move on to another group, the group they just spoke to, they go back to what they were doing before. And I think the way that we can control that is by the numbers. My concern is I do speak to the residents on Sigourney, and they're telling me that people are just parking, sometimes in the neighborhood, sometimes the residents from the area, and they're walking down. So it's not just vehicles that are down there that are adding to it. It's the amount of people getting dropped off and walking down from the neighborhoods that's increasing the numbers. So at phase 2, I mean, we might be able to change if we go to phase 3, but at phase 2, I prefer a number because my concern is that we have so many cars down there, those cars might have 4 or 5 people in them, and it's not going to be a perfect science to control the amount of people.
Thank you.
Counselors? Okay, so we are gonna use our capacity up to 150 people.
No, the motion was to cap it at 50% capacity of parking.
And I'm sorry, can we take a step back? Didn't we enter phase 2 June 1st?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay, all right, just checking.
What's our number with 50%? 100.
The motion currently is to cap it at 50% of available parking spaces. If Ms. Abbott wants to change her motion to 150 people, I'd be happy to change my second.
No, I'll stick to the 50% of cars. That's what Middletown did. I think it's a lot less subjective. I think we've had issues enforcing both the number and social distancing from what I've seen at the beach. And I think enforcing the number of cars is a lot more straightforward, and there will be a lot less heartache on the part of residents and their complaints to us. You know, because you go to the beach and I don't know, I counted 110 last time I was there. So what are we going to do? 101, 102? It's all kind of subjective and very difficult to keep it to 100 exactly, but 50% parking capacity is easy to enforce and it controls the number somewhat without over restricting it. So we don't have a reservation system. We're not, having people sign in or sign out so that we know exactly the number that are there. Cars, we can count exactly, and it's easy to say, look, we let 67 cars in, that's it. And then if they want to go out of their way to get in there, quote unquote, illegally, then we're not going to be able to control what everybody does all the time. But I think it leaves a lot less room for people getting upset if we limit the parking capacity versus trying to count the exact number of people getting out on the beach. Because the reality is there's some people that are going to social distance when you come and yell at them, and then when you turn around and walk away, like you said, Chief Peters, and go on to the next group, they'll be right back together. So I just want to make it so that, I don't know, families can go to the beach with their kids and make that as easy and safe as possible. And I read through all the policies that were implemented for Second Beach and Third Beach, and I think limiting 50%, make it resident only, 50% parking capacity, achieve what I intended when I first brought this to Mr. Rayner a month or two ago, whenever it was. So that would be, I stick by my motion.
I just want to offer up, I understand what we're saying here about it's easier to identify the number of cars. But I think we still have to be mindful of the drop-off factor. And a lot of kids that are middle school age are not driving down to Sandy Point. They're walking, they're biking. And you would have large gatherings of kids and very few cars in the parking lot. So I think we need to have a little bit of a compromise here with, yes, limiting some numbers of cars in the parking lot, but also having some guidelines to a maximum number of people on the beach, which again, would allow our lifeguards and our police to monitor. And again, you're absolutely right. You could have a family of 5 sitting on a blanket, and not need a ton of space at 160 square feet per person, but there will be some individuals that want space. I think we need a balance here. I don't think it can be one or the other. I think we need to look at both scenarios and make sure that we don't have 400 or 500 people down on the beach, because I don't think that's a good thing. I think we have to be careful here and still take into account the number of people, because that's a local guideline. That is still a guiding principle with social distancing, is the sheer numbers that you have.
Absolutely, of course it is, but we have the guidelines, right? We can enforce the number of cars. The guidelines are groups no larger than 15 and a minimum of 6 feet apart per group, I believe, are the guidelines for phase 2. That's what we can enforce in the on the beach. If we see a group greater than 15, we got to tell them, guys, your group is too big. You need to split up. And if you have groups that are, close together, you say you need to spread apart. And that will kind of organically limit the number of people on the beach without having to implement a head count and then having the head count be off and people getting upset about it.
Okay, so any more, so that right now the motion is to,
Mr.
Mr.
President,
President.
Mr. Crosby has a comment.
Mr. Crosby.
Yes, Ms. Abbott said that we could go around and break up these groups. I would like to know precisely who the person is that is at the bottom of the hill once the capacity of the parking lot has reached 67 cars or whatever it is that is going to stop anybody else from coming down the hill. And secondly, who is going to be walking up and down the beach saying...
The same people that are doing it right now, Mr. Crosby, the same person that turned around families that were trying to go to the beach. Go ahead, I'm sorry, I interrupted.
One at a time, folks.
No, okay, never mind. Thank you.
Mr. President, I do want to say I agree with the point you're making. The problem is whether the people are large or small, every person is potentially a vector for this disease. And when a certain number of them congregate within a specific area, the risk for infection does go up. So I think pursuant to Mr. Hamilton's recommendation the other week, that we continue to keep this on the agenda. Because if, again, I had rather expected that there would be a great deal of people walking down from the neighborhoods onto these beaches because they're so close to the neighborhoods, they're pretty accessible. If we start seeing unmanageable numbers of people on the beach, we're going to have to try to figure out some way of limiting them. It's going to be very difficult to sort of prevent people from walking down. So I think we really do need to keep a very close eye on the numbers on the beach. Because again, every additional person statistically raises the risk of people getting infected.
Thank you, Ms. Ryan. So let's just go back to the motion. The motion is for 60, to go to 50%, 65 cars, but no limit on the number of people.
Well, I would amend the motion to limit the number of people to 150. So people buy houses and live in that neighborhood or those neighborhoods specifically so they can walk down to the beach. So I would amend the motion to 60 cars and 150 people max at Sandy Point.
Here's another issue though that I'm wondering how we're dealing with. People that are the excess number of people that are getting down to the beach are walking in from the neighborhood or walking in from Glen Park. We're not monitoring those sites and we're not turning people around. And we're also not kicking people off the beach once they get there if we're in excess capacity. Or is that what we intend to do? If people walk over from Glen Park or down from the neighborhood and we're over that 150, are we going to kick them out? That it seems like a lot of extra monitoring that's required to actually enforce that. I'm not against a limit on the number of people. I agree. It's just, it seems like it's a lot more enforcement.
The number of people we think about, the anticipated number of people arriving by car, which was 90%. So, like I say, Middletown used 80%, we used 90%. So that we try to account for the number of people that are going to walk in, whether through private property or gate.
Okay.
So we have a motion. There's a second.
Motion, no second.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second for 60 cars and a maximum of 150 people. All those in favor?
Jukusa?
Nay.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Capson?
Aye.
Aye.
Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 6-1. Okay,
That was the amendment.
That was the
that was
amendment.
the amendment, I'm sorry. I was hoping it was the motion. So now on the motion.
Ms. Jukusa?
I will vote nay. I prefer to rely on the recommendation of our staff.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Capson?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Nay.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
And Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. 5-2, the motion passes 5-2. And we will continue to monitor the situation as necessary.
Mr. Aguirre, Chief Peters, if I could just ask a question. Could I just get the council's direction now then, since we are limiting vehicles on the beach? Will Sigourney now be limited to permit parking only for the household on that street?
So Len
That's what
Katzman,
makes sense.
yeah, Len Katzman, I was under the impression that that is what we had intended originally, when we, that it would be resident of those streets, parking only.
You hear that, Chief Peters?
I was broken up, sorry, I could not.
I think we were confirming that our understanding was from the outset, at least my understanding from the outset was that parking on Sigourney and would be limited to residents of that street.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I have a question on the council. We do have the recommendation to ban the fires on Macquarie. Does the council want to take any action on, fires out on Macquarie Point, Macquarie Beach?
Mr. President, I don't think that people were properly noticed about this particular subject. I think it should be placed on the agenda on its own.
I agree.
Yeah, me too.
Then we will put that on for our next agenda. We do have the recommendation from folks, so we'll be able to provide that as backup. Our next council meeting.
I mean, two years ago, last year, we just changed it to making sure you had to have a permit. I think to Mr. Kelly's point, there'll be a lot of upset people if we did it tonight without them being able to talk about it. That it's not fully advertised.
And Mr. Kelly. So we will push that to having that on our agenda for a future council meeting. Okay. We all set. So we will be moving on to new business. New business item number 1. Request of approval for a drive-in movie night at Glen Park on June 25th.
I make a motion that we approve the request as presented.
Andrew
Danielle Abbott.
Kelly, second. That was a second from Andrew Kelly.
Second,
And that was Ms. Abbott. That's the,
Abbott, yep.
Yes.
Okay, we do have, we have a quick hand up. I think free up the Blue Haven.
Hi, it's Representative Terry Corcoran. So I just wanted to just say that I'm glad you got this on the agenda, and I'm not sure if Rebecca from Newport Film is on the call, on the line as well, but
They are, yes.
oh, good, good. I can't see who's on, but after discussions, just casual discussions about what we could do this summer, it was actually Councilwoman Abbott had suggested, you know, maybe a drive-in. So I had a contact at Newport Film and I reached out to Rebecca, and so I'm glad she's on the call. So that's all I wanted to say. So.
And I just want to say thank you to you, Terry. I think it's an awesome idea, and I think it's a great way to, you know, kind of bring our community together despite the unfortunate circumstances facing us this summer. And thank you to Newport Film for agreeing to organize it, and we look forward to it.
Okay. Thank you all. So we have a motion and a second.
Mr. President, I feel like they prepared quite a bit of information to present to the council, and if we just would take a few minutes to let Rebecca summarize what the plan is, I'd like to have that shared with the public.
Yes, that would be great.
Just raise your hand. So Newport Film, this should be Rebecca.
Hi, this is Rebecca Bertrand. I'm at 29 Carey Street in Newport. I'm the executive director of Newport Film, and I thank you very much for considering our proposal. We worked very closely with the Department of Business Regulations and also the commercial drive-in movie theaters that are working in the state to make sure that the plan that we submitted fits in line with exactly what the commercial theaters are allowed to do. So there will be complete social distancing in all ways. All the cars are going to be parked 6 feet apart, left to right. We also are ensuring that there's going to be a 20-feet aisle between rows, but also on the sides so people can safely exit and enter the drive-in. It will be about a 90-minute film. It's an environmental film, and we just confirmed it's a Patagonia documentary called The Public Trust, which is pretty exciting because it's all about using public land and appreciating public land. So we appreciate using public land to show that film. We are also encouraging all guests or requiring all guests to be wearing a face cloth covering the whole time that they're outside of their car. And people can either watch the film from inside their car with their windows down with the face cloth covering on, or they can watch from a truck bed or directly in front of their car. Or I suppose also if they're in a convertible, we would also ask that they have a mask on. We're making sure that there's no congregation of groups, and that if you're outside of your car, that you're waiting in line either for the restroom or that you are getting food from a food vendor. So we are going to be sure that all attendees are pre-registered and that everyone receives these guidelines in advance, and then they'll be posted on signage throughout the venue and then also on the pre-film screen wash. We're pretty experienced at doing drive-ins. We've done just about one a year as part of our summer film series that we've held many years in a row out at the polo fields. So we're sort of tweaking the way that we can experience events together this year, obviously. So, you know, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have, but we did receive verbal approval from the Department of Business Regulations last Thursday afternoon for our plan. So we're hoping to have a mini series of drive-ins that travels across Aquidneck Island, and we're excited to work with you.
Thank you. It does sound like a great opportunity. I have been with you in the past, so I do enjoy the opportunity, and that's a great venue down there. So I'm hoping that this is a tremendous success. Do we have comments? The councilors? We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye. Thank you, Becca.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Councilman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. Thank you. Okay, on to new business number 2. It's request approval of resolution condemning racist attacks and urging efforts to recognize and stop racism. Susan Kulik.
Right, so for the folks who are not able to Zoom, I'll just read it quickly. It's a resolution condemning racist attacks and urging efforts to recognize and stop racism. Whereas it is important for every American, and especially elected officials, to condemn and work to prevent racism. And whereas during a virtual town hall event held on May 27th, Rhode Island State Senate candidate Jennifer Rourke was targeted by anonymous bullies who crashed her online event with violent racist commentary and threatened her safety and well-being. And whereas during a Newport City Council Zoom meeting in May 2020, racial epithets were directed at council member Angela McCalla, including multiple uses of the N-word. And whereas people of color should not only be able to run for office and hold elected office without facing racist harassment, they should also be able to birdwatch, jog through their neighborhoods, sleep in their own homes, and otherwise live everyday lives without a constant fear of being targeted or even killed by racists. And whereas recent national and local events have challenged all communities to renew their commitment to pursuing social justice. Now, therefore, be it resolved, the Portsmouth Town Council condemns all individual and systemic racism and urges all Americans to join in our condemnation and work to recognize and stop racism. And be it further resolved that a copy of this resolution be forwarded to every Rhode Island municipality, school committee, state senator, state representative, and the governor. Approved by Town Council action this 8th day of June 2020. You know, I know words alone are never enough, and I don't have all the answers, so I encourage people to reach out to me with specific suggested actions. I know that the superintendent, Kenworthy, has made a similar statement, and that our school committee will be discussing what could be done in our school at tomorrow night's meeting, so I encourage people to join the school committee Zoom meeting. That said, I move we approve this resolution. Thank you.
Daniela Abbott, second. I would like to just make a brief comment if I could. This is an excellent resolution. I wholeheartedly agree with, sorry, is there somebody else talking?
No.
All right. Sorry, I just got some cross connection in my headphones. But anyway, thank you, Councilwoman Ujifuza, for introducing this. I wholeheartedly agree with the entire resolution, and I feel this is an important statement to make. I will, however, add that as we sit here in Portsmouth, we are a relatively wealthy community with a pretty much non-existent racial minority. So it feels slightly hypocritical to pass this when I don't think our actions really reflect the words in this. So I stand by what you said, Linda, and I would like to challenge all of us to really take these words to heart, particularly the challenging all communities to renew their commitment to pursuing social justice. And let's think about our actions and our policies and really think about how we can, you know, implement social justice and improve social justice in our own actions within our town and within our community. And I know the school committee is working on it, and I think we should all spend some time reflecting and thinking about how we can use our, quite frankly, privileged circumstances to make a difference in this arena. So, thank you.
So, who?
We have a hand up from a panelist.
Sorry, Council President, that was for the agenda on the last agenda, but we'll let this one go and I'll talk to about that after.
All right. So, okay, no further comments. So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Councilman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Dr. Aguilar?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. On to new business number 3. It's,
No, Mr. President, let's go backwards for Mr. Woodhead to talk about the film festival.
oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm a little late raising my hand. Council President, members of the council, I just asked if Rebecca could give me a call before they start this, laying out the film fest, because there is a little section right next to the sheep shed that is kind of steep, and if it does rain before the event, it does get kind of muddy down there, and I don't want to see anyone getting stuck. Maybe we can move the cars over towards the east a little bit more, just so they're not parked on the west side near that sheep shed. So if she can just give me a call before the event, just so we can coordinate this, so it's a win-win situation.
Thank you, Mr. Woodhead. Good, all good points, and I think we can reach out to Rebecca. We have all the contact information, so we'll definitely follow up on that side of things. Okay. Now we can go into business. Discussion of school budget adjustment. Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. President. As my agenda item states, we're going through obviously a very strained time in budgets, both this year and coming year. We don't know exactly what is going to outlay for the school department and the town. We're already seeing pretty extensive overtime for things that we're doing now in order to maintain COVID spacing and social distancing. So my motion would be to take the $300,000 out of the school allotment allocation, move it into a council contingency fund, so that if there is issues on the town side, or if there are issues, further on the school side, we have the flexibility to be able to move the money within the budget. I'm not suggesting we take the money out, although I would like to, lower taxes more, but at this point, I think we need the flexibility in order to handle any unforeseen circumstances. The past 3 years, the school department has realized surpluses of $500,000 and $500,000 respectively, and they're looking at close to $1 million this year, as reported by Mr. Dioro. So my motion would be to take $300,000 out of the school department's allocation, drop it from $980,185 to $680,185.
Okay. That's the motion. We have some comments. I was going to ask for a second. Is there a second? Do we have a second? We have a motion, no second?
Oh, that's fine. I just don't want to be sitting here next year looking for ways to correct budget mistakes that may have been made by not making a decision like this. I hope everyone's comfortable with the possibility of a supplemental tax next year.
Can we still discuss even if there isn't a second?
Sure.
I'll just like to add that I think given the current state of affairs, I can't see our economy getting back on track if working parents can't send their kids to school. So to me, my greatest fear and the biggest unknown is how are schools going to get kids back to school? And so I don't see how taking any money from the school surplus or whatever, or putting it back, I think it's in the right hands and it should stay with the schools. And I'm, very worried about what steps the schools will have to take to be operating in the fall. So that's why I'm not in favor of the motion. I think Dr. Kenworthy is on and has his hand up, so I'd like to hear what he has to say as well.
Have a hand up from Dr. Kenworthy.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, I did prepare some comments for this evening, anticipating that the motion would pass, at least for discussion purposes. I can read through some of those. I know in addition, Mr. Dioro is on here for further clarification. And I believe Dr. Copeland at least wanted to speak as well. If at any point you want to stop me, just let me know. But what I prepared for you this evening was just a thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak. And if this motion were to move forward, I was here to strongly urge you to not make any additional cuts to the school department budget. As you are aware, over the past few months, based on the requests of the council and Mr. Rayner, due to decreased revenue forecast, the school department has worked to identify $236,125 in cuts to date to our operating and capital budgets from what our school committee approved back in March. Over our FY20 budget, with the work that has been done from that original request and what has occurred since in further reductions, the school department has reduced an administrative position, a teaching position, and Council 94 positions that have included a clerical position and 2 positions related to security. Additionally, line items for salary increases for teachers and administrators have been reduced. Any reduction to our operating budget at this point would necessitate me to do work, if you will, to present a balanced budget to our school committee. And it's just worth noting that at this point, state law prohibits me from cutting any additional teaching or administrative positions after June 1st. Staff reductions would have to come at this point from our Council 94 union and would include further clerical or teacher assistant position cuts. And since the majority of our costs are fixed, I would have to additionally look at line items related to professional development and supplies at a time where, as Mrs. Abbott stated, there is a lot of uncertainty about what our needs for a return to school will be next year. While I recognize there is a lot of uncertainty around the state budget, at this point, based on what superintendents have been told, while we have been asked or told to plan for a possible 20 to 25% reduction in state aid on the school side next year, what I am hearing so far is that reduction will come most likely, hopefully not, but if it does, on the school side and not to cities and towns. And just for some context, Portsmouth schools are scheduled to receive approximately $3.8 million in total in state aid next year. So a 25% reduction would be approximately $950,000. And I know there is some question as to some of the steps we've taken so far on our side to create a COVID-19 emergency fund with some anticipated surplus. I can assure you that many districts are working to establish these kinds of funds. Under state law, school departments simply cannot return a surplus to the town the way that other town departments can. As we have discussed before, any surplus that we have in Portsmouth on the school side by policy goes into a capital fund. This year, in anticipation of cuts to state aid and combined with additional anticipated social distancing costs, the school committee, on the advice of our attorney, redirected any potential surplus we will have to be held separately to cover those types of costs. In closing, we have already had $236,000 reduced from our original budget requests, and I've described some of those impacts for you. And I ask that you not cut any additional money at this time in our budget in the midst of all of this uncertainty. And again, Mr. Dioro or Dr. Copeland, I'm sure, could comment further.
Mr. President, can I respond to a few of those comments from Mr. Kentworthy?
Yes, Michelle.
Superintendent Kentworthy, I appreciate the situation we're in and understanding what state law is based on the June 1st layoff notices. And possibly, since I see Representative Corcoran is still here, how are you going to justify, or how is the state going to justify if they take 25% of your funding away and don't give you the flexibility of being able to create layoffs? One question, and I don't know if you probably can't answer that because you're not inside the head of the 113 people up in the legislature.
I would have the same type of question, but yes.
Yeah, exactly. So, there's no rhyme or reason up there. As far as cuts to cities and towns, we don't get anything from the state, so they really can't cut anything from us on the town side. They can only cut on the school side. So the motion as I presented leaves the money in the budget. Essentially, it's a pre-give back of any surplus that you may have next year. Based on the past 4 years, there's always been a surplus. So having the $300,000 in this town side contingency fund allows that flexibility that if come March next year, you have to come and say, hey guys, we're going to be about $100,000 short. It's there. But it allows the town the flexibility to be able to utilize it if need be for overtime expenses. I'm scared to death that we lose 3 or 4 firefighters or 3 or 4 policemen and we have overtime through the roof. And we don't have the necessity or the ability to pay for it. I would be interested, since we've never gotten a good firm number, and I don't know if Mr. Giurio can give us that number right now, but what is the surplus that the school department is currently sitting on?
All right, I believe he is on, so he is prepared to answer those questions. If he can be recognized.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Good evening. Yes, to answer your question, Mr. Hamilton, the school department has a couple different buckets of surplus. We have our rainy day fund, which our policy that's at 1.5% of budget, which is $593,000. We have a reserve for OPEB of $340,000, and we have a capital fund of $890,000. So in total,
All right, Chris, you broke up on the total there, but I'm going to guess it was somewhere around 900,000.
what the capital was 890,000. The total was 1.8 million.
Okay. And then in anticipation of this year, with next year's budget being a little bit higher, obviously, your contingency fund's going to go up to maybe $600,000 to $650,000, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Usually only goes up about 5,000 or 6,000. It's only 1.5% of the.
Okay. So it's going to be 600,000. Let's round up, make my life easier.
That's fair to say, yes.
And then currently you're looking at a surplus, give or take $900,000 to $1 million.
At this point, it's probably more like 600 to 700,000. We've used some of it to purchase Chromebooks to go one pre-K through 12 in anticipation of remote distance learning for next year.
Okay. Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you, Chris.
Yep. Ms. Copeland? Joey,
Hi, can you hear me?
got you now.
We can.
Thank you. Emily Copeland, 25 Winston Drive, Portsmouth, Chair of the Portsmouth School Committee. Well, thank you, first of all, for not seconding the motion to actually vote on it, but it is important to, I think, clarify what actually is being suggested here. When I asked for a little clarification on this motion, the answer was that this 300,000 would actually be coming out of our operating budget for next year. So I would like to stress that this is not a give back of the surplus. This would actually be, as Ms. Abbott said, a reduction in the amount of money available to the schools for their FY21 operating budget. And I know you have a lot on your agenda, so I'm going to just be very direct. Taking that $300,000 from the school's operating budget I do not believe will solve the problems that Mr. Hamilton is referring to. It will instead create new problems for the town, the schools, and the taxpayers. For the last 10 years, it has been the state that has actually created a revenue hole in Portsmouth budget due to the reduction of state aid based on the funding formula. So this year's state aid cut was about $210,000. But it is, hopefully, one never knows, the final year of these 10 years of cuts. But what that's meant for Portsmouth is that even though we've really run our schools very efficiently and very well, we've always had to ask the town to help make up that hole. So just to give you some specific data, in 2018, our expenditures only increased 0.3%. That's only $97,000. But we had to ask the town for $449,000 due to declines in state aid. Similarly, in 2019, our expenditures only increased 1.8%, but we also had to ask the town for more. So my hope was that now, going forward with the last year of state aid cuts, we would actually be able to reflect more the efficiencies of the school and how the district is run, rather than the hole being created by the loss of state aid. However, if you approve this reduction of $300,000 from the operating budget tonight, then the town is essentially creating a new hole in our operating budget. And we will have to come back to you next year to try and fill that hole, as well as match whatever increases in costs we face. A surplus that Mr. Hamilton refers to in his backup is not guaranteed. Yes, for those 3 years, we did have surpluses, but we've also had deficits, right? 4 years ago, we had a deficit of $341,000. This year, if you go back and look at our discussions in January and February, Mr. Diero was worried that we were also going to be facing a deficit of up to $250,000 because of increases in special ed costs and out-of-district transportation. So you can't, but we try. I know Mr. Diero and the school district really does an excellent job in trying to create a little surplus each year. Otherwise, we're deficit spending. But you cannot count on a surplus. And I think that this idea that somehow taking $300,000 out of an operating budget when we've already $206,000 in cuts, and we're likely also facing a reduction or withholding, let's put it that way, of state aid, is really a recipe for disaster. It's not solving a problem. I would argue it's creating new ones. I think the schools have very responsibly moved, as Dr. Kenworthy said, to create buffers in place so that we do not have to come to the town and ask for additional assistance. And so I respectfully request that you don't second this motion and move it to a vote, but let it drop. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vogel. Okay. Is there any further comments from councilors?
Nope, I look forward to a budget next year that's a budget request next year from the school department that's about $300,000 less than what it is this year. We're talking about $1 million increase this year. The past couple of years have been 500,000, 400. So based on Ms. Copeland's comments, we're looking at a pretty relatively flat increase next year because we don't have to make up that hole.
We're going to move on to number 4. Request approval to abate the 2004 to 2008 delinquent taxes in the amount of $2,165.01.
Motion to approve. Second.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Capson?
Aye.
Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Thank you. Yes, aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you.
We have, next we have correspondence.
Motion to receive and place on file.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Mr. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Capson?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
And Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. On to future meetings. Coming up June 10th is our public budget hearing, be Wednesday. Same format of the Zoom presentation. And then we have our next regularly scheduled meeting of June 22nd. For our council meetings.
Mr. President, under future meetings,
Oh.
Mr. President, you still there?
Yeah.
On future meetings, do we want to, is it too early for us to consider what meeting we might take for our summer siesta?
I don't know, we might have to discuss the beaches. I'm just saying.
By July 13th, I would hope we have a pretty good handle on that, being the July 4th holiday is the week before.
Yeah.
By then, we may have to go down there and help Peters and patrol them.
We're marking at your house.
He can park at his house. The road will be under construction.
All right, so what would our opportunities be?
Well, it doesn't have to be decided tonight, but normally we would meet the 27th, and then we would meet the first week of August.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that would be based on
Yeah.
staff vacations and things like that too.
Well,
So maybe we can just discuss this on
On July.
the 22nd.
Thank you, Sheila. That's,
Motion to adjourn?
Seconded.
all those in favor?
Mr. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Capson?
Aye.
Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Right here.
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. Thank you all, and we will see you on Wednesday.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.